Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The dark alleys of the city echoed with the clinking of broken bottles and muffled screams. Marcus, a man with a calm but profound gaze, advanced slowly, observing the shifting shadows around him. A few confident neighborhood criminals surrounded him. "Hey, old man, you think you can just walk in here?" one of them sneered, brandishing a rusty knife. "Give us your wallet, and maybe we'll let you go without breaking your neck." Marcus smiled, a small but icy smile. He didn't need threats, his past would be enough to intimidate. But the men, blinded by arrogance and ignorance, didn't know that. They pushed him, mocking him for his aging stature and tired appearance. As one of them raised a fist to strike him, Marcus moved with uncanny fluidity. In a flash, he disarmed the attacker, knocking him to the ground with surgical precision. His movements were swift, silent, and deadly effective, a blend of combat techniques none of them had ever seen. The other criminals backed away in horror as Marcus stared at them. "You're playing with ghosts you don't understand," he whispered, each word carrying a warning. Within seconds, all three men were incapacitated, sprawled on the ground, unconscious but unharmed. Marcus straightened, adjusted his jacket, and resumed his march as if nothing had happened, leaving behind the stunned men, unable to comprehend how they had been overcome without apparent resistance. No one in these alleys knew that this man, once feared by another name, had been a ruthless assassin, a master of death. And for those who had humiliated him, they had learned too late that some pasts never die. Night had long since fallen on the dilapidated streets of Ravenwood. Marcus walked slowly but steadily, breathing evenly, his hands in the pockets of his old leather jacket. His eyes, though tired, scanned every dark corner with predatory attention. A few young neighborhood criminals, known for their arrogance and petty dealing, had spotted him. They laughed among themselves, confident they could intimidate a lonely old man. "Hey, Grandpa," shouted one of them, a nervous little brown-haired man named Ricky. "Give us your wallet, and we'll be nice to you." Marcus didn't answer. He just slowed down, offering them a faint smile that seemed friendly but carried the coldness of steel. The youths moved closer, laughing and nudging him lightly, like a stray dog. Ricky leaned towards him, arrogant. "What? You're scared, aren't you? You're pathetic." At that moment, Marcus felt a strange familiarity in their gestures, insolence, provocation, exactly the kind of situation he had faced thousands of times, but under another name, in another time. His past as an assassin, deadly and silent, shuddered beneath his skin. When one of the men raised his fist to strike him, Marcus reacted instinctively. His movements were fluid, precise, and of a speed no one could have matched. In an instant, Ricky found himself on the ground, unarmed and dazed, while his accomplices backed away, terrified by the efficiency and contained violence of the old man's gesture. Marcus straightened up, calm, his gaze icy. Some ghosts never sleep. The young people stood frozen, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The humiliation they thought they were inflicting on this old man had just turned against them, in the most brutal and silent way possible. Marcus continued on his way, leaving behind fear, silence, and a silent warning: never underestimate a past that killed to survive. The next morning, Ravenwood seemed ordinary. Passers-by milled about the streets, oblivious to the previous night's events. But for Marcus, the town was never truly normal. Every sound, every movement in the shadows, reminded him of the years he was known by another name, a name no one spoke anymore. In a small downtown apartment, Marcus turned on his computer and browsed social media. He quickly came across amateur videos of the young criminals from the day before, still bragging about their courage. Ricky's mocking laughter echoed through the speakers. Marcus sat with clasped hands and relived the scenes from his past. Every humiliation, every betrayal, every mission carried out with coldness and precision. It all came back, but he knew he couldn't just give this warning. These kids had crossed a line. They had to understand that they had awakened a sleeping predator. He pulled out a small notebook, covered with old notes and battle diagrams. His fingers ran over names, addresses, and faces he'd never forgotten. The young men of Ravenwood were mere pawns in a much bigger game. Marcus planned methodically. Every humiliation received, every mockery, every lie would be repaid 100-fold. But he didn't want to act hastily. His strength lay not only in his physical skill, but in his patience and strategy. As always, he would wait for the perfect moment. And when that moment came, he would strike with the precision of an assassin, leaving a lesson these young people would never forget. As he closed his notebook and stared out the window, a terrible calm settled over his face. The world was still unaware of the danger that walked among them. And Marcus knew that soon, Ravenwood would never look the same again. Marcus had waited for the right moment. Videos of Ricky and his accomplices were still circulating online, and their arrogance had only grown. He knew that for his revenge to have full impact, he had to strike subtly, making them vulnerable without them immediately understanding the danger. That night, he went out into the darkness, dressed in black, silent as a shadow. He positioned himself near the neighborhood where young people usually gathered, observing their habits. Every detail mattered: which paths they took, where they left their belongings, who they met. Marcus noted everything. Suddenly, he spotted Ricky, accompanied by 2 other youths, walking towards an abandoned warehouse. The laughter and loud conversation betrayed their carefree attitude. Marcus smiled inwardly. He knew that feeling of invincibility. He'd felt it himself once, and he knew how dangerous it was to underestimate what lurks in the shadows. With calculated precision, he prepared a small trap, a rope, a few carefully placed obstacles, and a door he knew how to make creak. When Ricky and his accomplices crossed this passage, they would be off balance, vulnerable, but not yet injured. Just enough to give them a taste of what Marcus was really like. A few minutes later, the kids arrived. Ricky, a confident smile on his face, suspected nothing. A false distraction, a sudden noise, and controlled chaos ensued. The kids fell awkwardly, tripping over the obstacles he had placed. They quickly got up, laughing nervously, believing it was just an accident. But Marcus, perched in the shadows, watched them with icy calm. He knew they had learned their first lesson. Marcus's world was not the one they knew, and every move would now be under his control. Fear, real fear, would begin to settle in their minds. As he disappeared into the night, he whispered to himself, "This is just the beginning. They will soon learn that some mistakes never go away." Marcus knew that for his revenge to be complete, he couldn't act against the entire group at once. Each youth had to feel fear in their own way, understanding that simply humiliating him was only the beginning. That night, he focused on Ricky, the most arrogant of the group. The man thought he had everything under control, but Marcus had already studied his habits. He always smoked on the same street corner, his phone lying carelessly beside him. Marcus slipped silently into the shadows, each step calculated, each breath controlled. He watched Ricky light his cigarette alone. Then, silently, he dropped a small can of smoke into the nearby trash can. The cloud rose instantly, covering the alley in a gray veil. Ricky coughed, surprised and disoriented, and felt a cold breath brush against the back of his neck. He turned around, but there was no one there. His heart was pounding. He wanted to call his friends, but his phone slipped from his hand into the smoke, as if pushed by an invisible force. Panic set in. Ricky felt the weight of real intimidation for the first time. Marcus had chosen to strike with fear before striking physically. Minutes later, Marcus disappeared into the darkness, leaving Ricky shaking and disoriented. He knew that fear could be more powerful than any blow, and Ricky had just discovered how vulnerable he was. In the following days, Marcus repeated this type of subtle attack for each of the other youths, each receiving a lesson tailored to their weaknesses and habits. Fear was beginning to spread through the group, but they still didn't know who was Marcus really, nor what he was capable of. Marcus's past as a deadly, once silent assassin now manifested itself through every move and every plan. And Ravenwood would soon discover that even an old man could become a fearsome predator when he had been humbled. After several days of subtle manipulation and insidious fear, Marcus sensed the time was right for a direct confrontation. His victims, now nervous and paranoid, were easy to locate. He chose to strike when their arrogance returned, believing they had regained control. That night, Ricky and his accomplices met in a secluded parking lot, thinking they were safe to talk. Forced laughter and awkward jokes betrayed their anxiety. Marcus watched them from the shadows, silent, implacable. Then, with a fluid movement, he appeared before them, almost like a ghost. The shock was immediate. Ricky stepped back, his face ashen. The others tried to stand, but Marcus silenced them with a gesture. His gaze was icy, threatening. There would be no escape. "You thought you could humiliate me," he said in a calm but terrifying voice. "You don't know who you woke up." The young people froze. Each felt the magnitude of their mistake. Marcus's movements were quick, precise, but this time it wasn't just fear, he was showing them he could physically control them. A few subtle blows, quick holds, were enough to knock them to the ground without causing serious injury. The pain was there, but what dominated was the lesson: Marcus was not a man to be underestimated. Ricky, panting and humiliated, tried to speak, but Marcus interrupted him. "Every action has its consequences. Yours has just begun." Then, without waiting for their reaction, Marcus disappeared as silently as he had appeared, leaving the young people lying on the ground, terrified and helpless. This direct confrontation marked a turning point. Fear was no longer just mental, it was becoming a tangible reality that young people could never forget. In the shadows, Marcus resumed his march. He knew his revenge must continue, but each step would be more strategic and more personal, until those who had humiliated him finally understood the depth of their error. After the direct confrontation, Marcus knew the lesson had to go deeper. The mental fear and physical pain had had an impact, but for his victims to truly understand the gravity of their actions, he had to strike where they felt safe, their families, their haunts, their daily lives. Marcus observed their routines for several days. He now knew every path, every habit, every place they considered safe. Then he began his subtle but terrifying actions: a doorbell that rang with no one at the door, shadows that seemed to follow their every step, anonymous messages slipped under their doors. The young people began to distrust each other, unable to understand who would orchestrate all this. Paranoia quickly set in. Every sound of the night, every figure in the alleyway, became a threat. Marcus now controlled not only their immediate surroundings, but their minds as well. One night, Ricky heard a faint noise inside his apartment. When he opened the door, he found a simple note: "You can't run away from me." No signature, no explicit threat, just the certainty that Marcus was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Marcus, meanwhile, watched the scene from a distance, motionless and invisible. He wasn't looking for confrontation this time. He knew that fear could be more powerful than any violence. Every young person had to feel Marcus's absolute control in his life, on his safety, on his thoughts. The city, still unaware of his true identity, would soon discover that even the most arrogant criminals are never safe. And Marcus knew the lesson wasn't over yet. Every move, every strategy, every fear inflicted brought them closer to an inevitable conclusion: they had awakened an assassin, and he never forgets. Marcus knew that fear alone would not be enough to make people understand the extent of their mistake. To strike deeper, he had to exploit their own flaws and secrets. Every young person had a past they thought was buried, petty crimes and lies that Marcus already knew about. For several days, he patiently gathered evidence: photos, videos, messages, and details of their illegal activities. Everything was recorded with methodical precision. Marcus didn't just want to intimidate them physically or mentally, he wanted to show them that everything could be revealed. He started with Ricky. An anonymous video arrived in his inbox: him stealing from a store, filmed without his knowledge. Panic seized him. Then more evidence followed: compromising messages, suspicious encounters with dangerous individuals, petty crimes that seemed insignificant but, taken together, formed a damning case. The other young people received the same anonymous gifts. Everyone understood that Marcus knew everything, saw everything, and could destroy their reputation in an instant. The once arrogant group was now divided by fear and mistrust. They no longer knew who to talk to, where to hide, or how to protect themselves. Marcus, observing the panic he had instilled, smiled inwardly. His revenge was no longer simply a matter of strength or fear, it was absolute control, mental and emotional. Each young person was now aware that their mistake, humiliating a man they thought was weak, would haunt them for the rest of their lives. He closed his notebook, satisfied. The lesson was moving along quickly, but Marcus knew that the final blow was to be reserved for when they believed they were completely safe. After weeks of planning, subtle fear, and manipulation, Marcus felt the time had finally come for the final face-off. All the young people, now nervous and paranoid, thought they could hide, believing the threat was behind them. But Marcus knew that the real confrontation had to be public, unforgettable, and irreversible. He chose an old abandoned warehouse, a neutral location where no one could interfere. The young people, thinking they were meeting to repair their cohesion, were trapped by Marcus, who was waiting for them, calm and imposing in the darkness. "So, you really thought you could make a fool of me and get away with it?" Marcus snapped, his voice echoing in the vast, empty space. The young people stepped back, unable to answer. Everyone could see in his eyes that Marcus was no ordinary man. He was a contained storm, a force ready to strike with precision and composure. With a swift but controlled movement, Marcus disarmed each individual, immobilizing them without excessive force. Then he activated screens placed throughout the warehouse, compromising photos, videos, and messages flashed by, revealing all their illegal actions and lies. Panic rose to a fever pitch. Ricky tried to speak. "Hey, we can explain." Marcus cut him off, calmly but authoritatively. "There is nothing to explain. Every action has consequences. You chose to humiliate me. Now you are faced with your choices." The young people, trembling, realized that this revenge was not only physical, nor only mental. It was a complete revelation of their vulnerability, orchestrated by a man they had believed to be weak, but who was in reality a master of strategy and deadly precision. Marcus finally released them, leaving them humiliated, terrified, and aware that their arrogance had awakened a predator. As he disappeared into the shadows of the warehouse, he knew this night would be etched in their memories forever. After the final confrontation, Marcus knew his revenge was coming to an end. Each young man had learned his lesson: fear, humiliation, and the display of their vulnerability. Each of them now understood that they should never have underestimated him. In the days that followed, the young people tried to resume their normal lives, but fear remained a constant presence. Every dark corner, every sound of the night reminded them of Marcus. Rumors about the mysterious man who had orchestrated their humiliation circulated throughout the neighborhood, reinforcing their paranoia. Marcus, meanwhile, returned to his daily life, invisible among the crowd. His actions had been silent but effective. No unnecessary acts, no gratuitous violence. He had reminded these young people that appearances are deceptive, and that certain forces, even dormant, can return with formidable power. For Marcus, revenge was not a game of pleasure, but an act of personal justice. The scars left on the minds of his victims were enough to mark the end of this episode. He knew the fear he had instilled would last a long time, and that was enough for him. As he walked through the quiet streets of Ravenwood, night enveloping the town, he smiled slightly. The ghosts of the past never sleep, and those who chose humiliation had now learned to never wake a deadly assassin. Revenge was accomplished, silent but complete, and Marcus could finally fade into the shadows, free and invincible, as he had always been. A few weeks after the confrontation, Ravenwood seemed to have returned to normal. The noisy streets and dark alleys were filled with the same familiar faces. But for those who had dared to humiliate Marcus, the neighborhood was never the same again. Ricky and his accomplices had changed. Their arrogant laughter was gone, replaced by nervousness and wariness. Every move they made was now measured, for the fear they had felt in the face of Marcus persisted, creeping into their thoughts, keeping them awake, forcing them to remember that some pasts never die. In the shadows, Marcus continued his life as if nothing had happened. He walked the streets, silent and invisible, observing a presence no one could measure. The locals sometimes spoke of the mysterious man who had humiliated the criminals, but no one knew his name, his face, or his past. He had become a legend, a ghost that haunts the memory of those who made the mistake of underestimating him. Marcus, however, knew his mission was accomplished. Revenge hadn't been a bloody spectacle, but a lesson in intelligence, strategy, and control. The youths had learned, through fear and humiliation, what it meant to awaken a deadly predator. As night fell over Ravenwood, he walked away through the deserted streets, silent and free. The shadows welcomed him like an old friend, and the town went on with its life, never knowing that justice and revenge can sometimes go hand in hand, carried by a man no one will ever forget.